One RV in my driveway was about to cost me $1,500 a day. But my neighbor had no idea he was about to lose everything he'd built his power on. Sometimes the American dream comes with a nightmare attached. My wife and I learned this the hard way when we bought our first home at 24 and 25. Young, hopeful, and completely naive about the three letters that would nearly destroy our peace. HOA. We'd spent months searching for our forever home. Something perfect for the family we hoped to build someday. The neighborhood seemed like paradise. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, the kind of place where kids could ride bikes safely. We signed those papers with stars in our eyes, completely unaware we just entered someone else's kingdom. For the first few months, everything felt perfect. Our neighbors waved from their porches. The community seemed tight-knit, and we began to settle into what we thought would be our sanctuary. But paradise has a way of revealing its serpents when you least expect it. The trouble started with something as innocent as a vacation. We'd rented an RV for a week-long adventure across the state, our first real getaway as homeowners. I parked it in our driveway 3 days before departure, figuring I'd need time to pack and, well, honestly, to figure out how half the contraptions inside actually worked. It seemed reasonable. It was our driveway, after all. Within an hour, I discovered just how wrong I was. The man who stormed across the street that evening wasn't just a neighbor. He was a member of our HOA board, and he carried himself like a general inspecting enemy territory. His face was flushed with righteous anger as he planted himself inches from my face, screaming about his neighborhood and demanding I remove the RV immediately. The word that struck me most wasn't his threats about towing or fines. It was that possessive pronoun, his neighborhood, as if somehow, by virtue of sitting on a board, he'd become the feudal lord of our street. I told him, in terms that weren't particularly neighborly, to get off my property. When he threatened to return, I made it clear the police would be my next phone call. He left that night, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. 3 hours later, a massive tow truck rumbled down our quiet street like a mechanical monster. The driver climbed down while my neighbor approached with the swagger of someone who'd just won a war. He handed me a plain envelope containing what looked like an official decree. By order of the HOA, this RV is to be towed, along with a $1,500 fine for violating their sacred rules. Here's the thing about bullies. They expect everyone to crumble under their authority. But the tow truck driver wasn't part of their little kingdom. When I calmly explained that towing my vehicle from my own property without my consent might not end well for him legally, he suddenly decided this neighborhood drama wasn't worth his hourly rate. He climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving my neighbor standing there like a deflated balloon. That's when the real war began. I called a friend whose father happened to be an attorney, desperately seeking advice about this surreal situation. After reviewing the documents and hearing my story, he asked me to come down with a $500 retainer and all my paperwork. The next day, he sent the HOA board a letter that essentially told them to back off, in the most professional legal language possible. But my neighbor wasn't finished. Day after day, plain envelopes appeared in my mailbox. Not postmarked, just stuffed in there. Each containing another $1,500 fine. Each time, I dutifully handed them to my attorney, who fired back with more letters and began documenting something interesting. Putting mail directly into someone's mailbox without going through the postal service is actually a federal crime. We went on our vacation anyway, leaving the RV parked exactly where it belonged, in our driveway. For a week, we drove across beautiful landscapes, trying to forget the bizarre situation waiting for us at home. But the peace couldn't last forever. When we returned, we needed 2 days to unload and clean the RV before returning it. 2 more days, 2 more envelopes, 2 more attorney visits. The pattern was becoming exhausting and expensive. Then came the piece of paper that changed everything. My neighbor handed me what looked like an official legal summons, demanding I appear before the HOA board on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. The document was designed to look intimidating, official, legally binding. There was just one problem: it was completely illegal. My attorney's eyes lit up when he saw it. "They've impersonated legal authority," he explained. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud." Another $500 later, we prepared for what would become the most satisfying Tuesday morning of my life. The board meeting was held in a community center that felt more like a courtroom, with the board members seated behind a long table like judges. They tried to exclude my attorney, citing some mysterious board privacy rule, but quickly backed down when he began reading their own regulations aloud. Regulations they'd apparently never bothered to fully understand. That's when we discovered the beautiful irony buried in their own rule book. Deep within the HOA's founding documents were specific guidelines about board member eligibility. Certain infractions, harassment, illegal activities, abuse of power, could disqualify someone from serving. My neighbor had committed not just one, but several of these disqualifying acts, all meticulously documented through our attorney's correspondence. But the real revelation was a single sentence buried on page 47. If 51% of HOA members voted to dissolve the association, the entire organization would cease to exist. My wife had been working part-time from home during this whole ordeal, which gave her something precious: time. Time to walk through our neighborhood, knock on doors, and really get to know the people living behind those perfectly manicured lawns. What she discovered was a community held hostage. Elderly residents afraid to put up holiday decorations without approval. Young families tiptoeing around arbitrary rules about when they could have friends over. People living in fear of their own homes, afraid that one small violation might result in hundreds of dollars in fines or legal action. The HOA wasn't protecting property values. It was terrorizing property owners. Over 2 months, my wife built something beautiful. A coalition of neighbors who'd simply had enough. The Disband the HOA campaign started with quiet conversations over coffee and grew into something that would reshape our entire community. The HOA Board, sensing their power slipping away, began to panic. They stopped holding meetings, ironically another violation of their own rules. They launched a counter-campaign that revealed their true colors, distributing flyers that warned about the dangers of not having an HOA. These weren't subtle warnings about property maintenance. They were racist, fear-mongering letters claiming that without their oversight, undesirable people would move in and destroy the neighborhood. The mask had finally slipped completely. Our neighbors weren't just angry anymore. They were disgusted. A community fund spontaneously formed to reimburse our attorney fees. People who'd never spoken before were organizing carpools to ensure everyone could attend the final meeting. The HOA tried every trick in their book to prevent the vote, but their own rules became their prison. They were forced to hold a meeting, forced to allow the vote, and forced to watch as their little kingdom crumbled. The final tally wasn't even close. 68% voted to dissolve the HOA. Just like that, it was over. The organization that had terrorized our neighborhood for years simply ceased to exist. All remaining funds were supposed to be distributed equally among the homeowners, though mysteriously, the HOA claimed to have spent every penny during their final 2 months of existence. The aftermath was swift and decisive. About half the former board members put their houses on the market within weeks, including my power-hungry neighbor. They couldn't bear to live in a community where they were just regular residents, subject to the same rules as everyone else. I spent hours trying to find the old news articles about our story. It made local headlines, primarily because of those racist flyers, but they vanished into the digital ether of time. Perhaps that's fitting. The HOA wanted to be forgotten, and in many ways they got their wish. The most powerful lesson isn't about standing up to bullies or navigating legal battles. It's about what happens when a community decides they've had enough of living in fear. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's discovering you were never as powerless as they wanted you to believe. And sometimes all it takes is one RV in a driveway to change everything.